Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Meyer. Thanks for joining me for a cup of Jonah, everybody. Cup of Joe. Good morning, Infinite. All right, so this morning, as a side note, a personal note, today I finish packing. Tomorrow I move into my new place. I'm moving into an RV, actually. And then a few weeks later, I'm heading south. And I will have the great honor and privilege of meeting the Ted Logan in person. So I'm excited, super excited about that. I feel like I've known him for decades. So it's gonna be wonderful to meet he and his lady. But yeah, so there's a lot going on today, but I did not want to miss you guys this Friday again. So here we are. So without further ado, that God is not the formal being of all things. Thank you, Meyer. Chapter 26. Yeah, I'm excited, Infinite. It'll be great. That God is not the formal being of all things. We are now able to refute the error of certain persons who said that God is nothing other than the formal being of each thing. He's referring to a number of Middle Age philosophers from the Middle Ages. This being is divided into the being of substance and the being of accident. Now we have proven that the divine being is neither the being of substance or that of accident. God therefore cannot be that being by which each thing formally is. Furthermore, things are not distinguished from one another in having being, for in this they all agree. If then things differ from one another, either their being must be specified through certain added differences, so that diverse things have a diverse being according to their species, or things must differ in that the being itself is appropriate to natures that are diverse in species. The first of these alternatives is impossible, since, as we have said, no addition can be made to a being in the manner in which a difference is added to a genus. It remains then that things differ because they have diverse natures, to which being accrues in a diverse way. Now the divine being does not accrue to a nature that is other than it. It is the nature itself, as we have said. If therefore the divine being were the formal being of all things would have to be absolutely one. Thank you for the repost, Meyer. So this is really, let's pause and reflect for a moment. Just take note as we step back for a moment. First of all, that's twice in the first paragraph that he's in the first two short paragraphs that he's referred back to saying that, okay, it's not an accident or a substance. God is not an accident or a substance. And that his being it's his nature, right? So there's no distinction between God's essence and his essence and his being, right? And so he was just able to reference those and move on with the conversation here that we're discussing. Imagine if he didn't. He'd have to pause and insert that entire chapter in this little paragraph. Think of how much harder it would be to follow. It's already a challenge, but think about how much harder it would be to follow if he hadn't ordered the work properly and would have to constantly continue back and like stop the argument he's trying to make or the discussion that he's trying to lay out, to go back and unpack whether or not God is his being is his substance, right? So having done so in advance, now every time that truth factors into or is essential in the argument of scientifically trying to understand some nuance or element as we continue to build our knowledge and understanding of God, he can just reference back to it. And he's like, okay, well, we've already established that option A is out. So it's interesting. It just little details like this really show how beautifully efficient of a teacher he is because of the order in which he treats things. So then too, a principle is naturally prior to that whose principle it is. Now, in certain things, being has something that is as its principle, for the form is said to be the principle of being, and so is the agent that makes things to be in act. Principle in this case, he means like you can almost think of it as like a font. A principle is like a source, or that place from which something flows or comes, right? So when he says the principle is prior to that whose principle it is, so you could say that my parents are my principles in some way, right? So I flow from them and they're prior to me. They have to be. If I'm going to come from them as a principle, they have to be before me, prior. For the form is said to be the principle of being, and so is the agent that makes things to be in act. If therefore the divine being is the being of each thing, it will follow that God, who is his own being, has some cause. Thus, he is not through himself a necessary being, but we have proven the contrary of this conclusion above, and he references chapters 15 and 5. Moreover, that which is common to many is not outside the many except by the reason alone. Thus, animal is not something outside Socrates or Plato and the other animals, except in the intellect that apprehends the form of the animal, stripped of all its individuating and specifying characteristics. For man is that which truly is animal. Otherwise, it would follow that in Socrates and Plato there are several animals, namely common animal itself, common man, and Plato himself. Much less, then, is common being itself something outside all existing things, save only for being in the intellect. Hence, if God is a common being, the only being that will exist is that which exists solely in the intellect. But we showed that above that God is something not only in the intellect, but also in reality. Chapter 11. Therefore, God is not the common being of all things. Yes, and thank you. Meyer points out, do yourself a favor, everybody, and subscribe to phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Thank you for the gentle reminder, Meyer. I forgot to plug the Substack there. You can tell there's a lot on my mind. Again, strictly speaking, generation is the way to being, and corruption is the way to non-being. For form is not the terminus of generation, and privation is not the terminus of corruption, except because a form causes being and privation non-being. If a form did not cause being, a thing which received such a form would not be said to be generated. Hence, if God is the formal being of all things, he will consequently be the terminus of generation. This is false, since as we have shown above, God is eternal. It will also follow that the being of each thing has existed from eternity. Generation or corruption is therefore impossible, but if it does exist, pre-existing must accrue to something anew. It will therefore accrue either to something pre-existing or to something in no way pre-existing. In the first instance, since according to the above position, the being of all existing things is one, it will follow that a thing that is said to be generated acquires not a new being, but a new mode of being. The result is alteration, not generation. But if the generated thing is in no way pre-existed, it will follow that it is produced from nothing, which is contrary to the nature of generation. This position, therefore, entirely runs generation and corruption, and as a consequence, entirely ruins generation and corruption, and as a consequence, is evidently impossible. Meyer says, don't worry, here at the HR department, we got your back, bro. Appreciate it, man. Sacred teaching as well casts aside this error in confessing that God is, quote, high and elevated, according to Isaiah, and that he is, quote, over all, according to Romans. For if he is the being of all things, he is part of all things, but not over them. So to those who committed this error are condemned by the same judgment as are the idolaters who, quote, gave the incommunicable name, that is of God, to, quote, wood and stones, as it is written in wisdom. If indeed God is the being of all things, there will be no more reason to say truly that a stone is being than to say that a stone is God. Now, it's interesting because we know from the little teasers that I've given you that one of the following chapters, I think it's 2 chapters from today, he'll talk about how God is in creatures. So not as being, but in some other way, which is really interesting. So 4 factors seem to have contributed to the rise of this error. The first is the warped interpretation of certain authoritative texts. Here, there is in Dionysius this remark, quote, the being of all things is the super essential divinity, end quote. From this remark, they wish to infer that God is the formal being of all things, without considering that this interpretation could not square with the words themselves. For if the divinity is the formal being of all things, it will not be over all, but among all, indeed part of all. Now, since Dionysius said that the divinity was above all things, he showed that according to its nature, it was distinct from all things and raised above all things. And when he said that the divinity is the being of all things, he showed that there was in all things a certain likeness of the divine being coming from God. Elsewhere, Dionysius has rather openly set aside this warped interpretation. He has said, quote, God neither touches nor is in any way mingled with other things, as a point touches a line or the figure of a seal touches wax, end quote. So one thing again I want to just pause and underline. All of these times that he quotes verbatim, and you can look up in the ancient texts in the original Latin, he's actually quoting word for word, character by character, exactly. He's quoting these ancient writers like Dionysius. But he didn't have access to these books. Once he read them, he said, I think I told you guys before, he said he never forgot a single word he ever read and understood. So he must have had photographic memory or something akin to it, because he's constantly quoting, whether from sacred scripture or other ancient writers, and yet never ever erring in terms of the exact quote, which is really beautiful. One more point before proceeding. His criticism of Dionysius is a nuance in that first phrase of the being of all things is a super essential divinity. He underlines that he's confused things, and he's failed to make an important distinction when he says that. And even though you can tell by looking at the entire corpus of his writings that he didn't believe that God was actually the being of all things. He believed that God was above all things and governed all things. So it's interesting how we see that imprecision in language can lead to error or misunderstanding, which is why, as I've underlined as well, the laborious trudging through some of the distinctions and fine apparently hair-splitting nuances that we've discussed in chapters leading up to this. The second cause leading them to this error is a failure of reason. For since that which is common is specified or individuated through addition, they thought that the divine being, which receives no addition, was not some proper being, but the common being of all things. They ignored the fact that what is common or universal cannot exist without addition, but is considered without addition. For animal cannot be without the difference rational or the difference irrational, although it is considered without these differences. What is more, although a universal may be considered without addition, it is not without the reception of addition, for if no difference could be added to animal, it would not be a genus. The same is true of all other names. In other words, what he's saying here is, just like we say animal of a dog, a dolphin, and a man, we mean animal by the same application we call predication. When we mean the same thing when we use the word animal, that when we apply that genus and understand that genus is present exists in those things, we mean the same thing by animal when we say it of all three. But there doesn't exist out in the world a quintessential animal, a species animal, because animal is a genus. So animal has within it many, many different species, but there is no animal out there that's just animal and no type of animal. Does that make sense? But the divine being is without addition, not only in thought, but also in reality. And not only without addition, but also without the receptibility of addition. From the fact then that it neither receives nor can receive addition, we can rather conclude that God is not common being, but proper being. For his being is distinguished from all the rest by the fact that nothing can be added to it. Hence, the commentator says in the Book of Causes that out of the purity of its goodness, the first cause is distinguished from the rest and in a manner individuated. So the commentator, remember, he has these nicknames for people. So he always calls Aristotle the philosopher. Averroes, who was a very renowned philosopher from the East at the time of Thomas, he always called him, or shortly before Thomas, he always called him the commentator, because his work on his commentaries on Aristotle were so good. The third factor that led them to this error concerning the divine simplicity concerns the divine simplicity, excuse me. God is at the peak of simplicity. They therefore thought that the last point of resolution in our way of seeing things is God, as being absolutely simple. For it is not possible to proceed to infinity in composition among the things we know. Their reason also failed because they did not observe that which is most simple in our understanding of things is not so much a complete thing as a part of a thing, but simplicity is predicated of God as some perfect, subsisting thing. The fourth factor that could have led them to their error is the mode of expression we use when we say that God is in all things. By this, we do not mean that God is in things as part of a thing, but as the cause of a thing that is never lacking to its effect. For we do not say that a form is in matter as the sailor is in a ship. So there he specifies, okay, we do say God is in all things, but not as a part, but as a cause. So there's, just like we say the effect of everything is in the power of its cause, so we say that we say that nothing can give what it doesn't have. So whatever exists out in the world has to have come from God and been in the power of God and existed somehow in God in some way, or at least traces of God are found in that thing. I like to think of it as like the fingerprint of God, but that's not a philosophically precise term. One thing I love, this going back a couple of paragraphs, that's the end of the chapter. So tomorrow we're going to look at, is God the form of anybody? So if he's not the form of all things, or if he's not the being of all things, is he the form of something or form of some of them? So we'll take a look at that tomorrow, or not tomorrow, rather, Monday. This concept, so two things I want to just comment on. This idea of simplicity. We know this in our hearts. When we encounter something or a situation that's very simple and straightforward, there's a purity to it. There's something good there. When something is really complicated, in fact, I think it's an old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. But for a moment there, I thought it was may you live in complicated times, which I guess both are somewhat saying something similar. But I think that's interesting. I think there's something refreshingly beautiful about simplicity. So part of why I'm excited about the RV life, just kind of simplifying things. I'm getting rid of all of my furniture except for the desk that I'm sitting at here, and the desk I use for work. So I'm excited about that. The other point, the paragraph before that I want to point out, is there's a difference between the being that we say is in God, and then the being that we experience and see in all creatures, specific being of individual creatures. And they're very different. One is a subsisting thing in itself, namely God, and the rest is some participation in that being, or flows from that being, or is given by that being, either directly or indirectly. And we'll get to this. I'm sure he'll reference this chapter when we talk about how we can say things or know things positively about God, which we're getting very, very close to that part of the book, just a few chapters away, which is exciting. So because of that, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say it was Boethius, one of the ancient Christian philosophers. Boethius said that it is more true to say of God that he does not exist than to say that he exists, because all we know experientially, all we know and have seen is created existence. So it's better to say that whatever this existence and things, whether it's this cup of Joe or the table that I'm sitting at, or myself or you, our existence is something other and inferior to the existence of God. So it's better to say, because that's our understanding of existence, that God does not exist, than to say that he exists. So how can we say that God exists? And that's what's going to be interesting when we talk about how can we say things positively of God. Very carefully. It's going to be part of the answer. Yes, Infinite. I have you thinking about the RV life. It would suit you perfectly. You know, I'm a little apprehensive, if I'm honest. So I went from city slicker, you could say, to country boy in the last couple of years, where I live kind of out in the boonies here, out in the hills. And I'm taking another step towards simplicity in an RV there. I'm hoping to be able to, I believe I found the place I'll be, which is almost, it's going to be right off the causeway in Florida there. So I'm going to be a 2-3 minute walk from the water. So I could, before a cup of Joe, I could go out and watch the sunrise. I'm excited about that. So we'll see. Someone was teasing me the other day about I should start a vlog of my RV life or something like that. I don't know. I think I'd have to choose between that and this, and I prefer this. but I don't know. We'll see. I will keep you posted, Infinite, how I like it. I believe I'll like it. The thing that's going to be a new thing for me is, there's a lot of there's a different kind of maintenance on an RV than on a home. There's propane tanks to manage, sewage hookups, and all kinds of other stuff. So we'll see. Yeah, it'll be a growth experience. I might be uncomfortable for a little bit, but that's where we grow, right? So I'm excited about it. But yeah, so one thing because I know, props to all of you who are still, because I know the last week or two, there have been a couple chapters that have been a little hard to follow, especially when you can't see it in the words in front of you. Just listening, it's been hard to follow some of the very subtle distinctions that are being unpacked and clarified. And I think you'll have your reward because as we get through this, you'll start to see as it builds on, and as he continues to build further truths on those distinctions that we made, it'll actually help clarify and bring more understanding to those chapters that we went through with some understanding and perhaps not a full grasping yet. But you can find this text online for free. Summa, Contra, Gentiles. It's in PDF form everywhere. Yeah. So I think it'll be good. It's exciting. In just a couple days, we'll turn our attention to how we name God, how we talk about God, how we understand things about God, how God is in his creatures. And then we'll start to say some positive, start to make some affirmations about God once we understand what we mean by those affirmations. Let me see if I can give you guys another teaser trailer here, just to stir your appetite. Let's see. In just a few chapters here, we'll talk about how our intellect forms a proposition about God, that God is good, that he's goodness itself, that there cannot be evil in God. This is a very important point, actually, and God cannot create evil. How does evil exist then? These are very interesting questions. So it's going to actually occasion the opportunity for many important discussions. Like, for example, if you stop and think about it, because there's this temptation to apply the yin and yang dualistic philosophy to everything and say that there's an equal, it's like the Gnostic idea of philosophy, the Gnostic philosophical idea, which says that basically there's an equal potency or power, I should say, to good and evil, that they're equal and opposing and balancing forces. This is not true. Light is that which renders something visible. Darkness is the absence of light. In the definition of darkness, there's a reference to light. Light is a positive reality of its own. Darkness is merely a privation of that positive existence. Excuse me. Same with goodness. Goodness is that which is desirable, and that the goodness is the object of the will. That's what draws us to something, is goodness. Evil is the privation of a do good. So again, good has a definition in of itself, and evil has a reference in its definition to good. Why? Because just like darkness is merely a privation of light, evil is merely a privation of a do good. And it has to be this way. Because otherwise we would have to say that God positively created evil, but he didn't. We'll see. Because evil is no thing. You cannot have incarnate evil. Very interesting. Because evil is not a positive reality. It's merely a privation. So beautiful considerations, lots of effects or consequences of those truths. But it's also very important because then we'll understand the difference between saying God created all things and saying, well, how is there evil in the world? In fact, I just finished a book last night that I think you guys would appreciate if you haven't read it yet. It was recommended to me a couple weeks ago. It's called The Giver. Very interesting. Infinite says, God protect and be with you on your new journey, Jonah. Thank you, Infinite. I appreciate you. Amen. Yes, in fact, Shiva, we did talk about this the other night. So make sure you check out the conversation I had with Shiva last Wednesday. Very, very wonderful conversation. The Giver. So what's I don't want to spoil it, but I'll give a teaser trailer because it's basically, you don't realize it until the very end, literally the last couple paragraphs, but you realize what the book is all about. This idea of free will, actually, very, very subtly and directly, because the book ends in a very unique and beautiful way that kind of leaves you hanging. The last 3 words, in fact, call into question the ending that you thought was coming. And so it's beautiful because it underlines the fact that it doesn't matter what the outcome was. It doesn't matter how it ended. What matters was the journey. Okay, I'll give a high-level overview, although I don't want to ruin it for you. Okay, I'll just. You may have read it already. Yeah, I do think they made a movie about it, Shiva. That's right. Yeah, it is amazing. It is amazing, Shiva. 100 times. That's awesome. Okay, I won't spoil it, Shiva. All right. But I think what you'll see very early on, it's kind of builds this whole understanding of this world where essentially free will is absent, completely absent. So as you grow up every year, it'll go into kind of into details and unfold this society where people don't have their own children. They're given to them. People don't even see color. People don't experience any sexual desire. It's all suppressed with medication. Everything is gray and bland. But in that context, everybody is quote unquote happy. They're content. They've satisfied themselves with this blasé existence. Not even their career choices are not only do they don't determine their own career choices, that it's given to them at graduation when they become when they turn 12 years old. But every year they have a specific uniform, a specific hairdo, a specific step that they accomplish, a specific set of rules that they need to learn, a specific function in society as they get older. And so you see, it's very structured, it's very ordered, it's very peaceful, very polite, very respectful, very calm, very tranquil. And yet there's something missing. Anyways, it's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. Short read, maybe 5-6 hour read. Also on Audible. But if you guys haven't read it, so I've been toying with the idea. Okay, segue into the last point. We're kind of starting to drag on here, but last point. I'd love in the comments below this post or somewhere else, anywhere else you can find it, I'm sure. No, I'm sorry. In the comments, I would love your feedback, because what I'm thinking of doing is, so we're just over a third of the way through this. Pretty heavy philosophical reading, as I'm sure you agree. Beautiful, but still heavy. So what I was thinking is, once we finish this book on God, again, we're a little over a third of the way, so we've got a couple months left, so there's nothing urgent in this. But I want to plant a seed, and I'd love your feedback. I'm thinking of taking a break from the heavy philosophy and reading some other lighter books that are easier to read and easier to follow. Perhaps I read The Giver to you guys. Perhaps I read Confessions of St. Augustine, which is an amazingly heartfelt and inspiring book where Augustine of Hippo from the 4th century shares his journey through life and his experience. And one of the things I love about that book is it's something that Augustine is a character that is a person that both Protestants and Catholics hold in high esteem, both. So it's not like you have to be Catholic to respect his opinion or to take value from what he says. But I think that would be beautiful. So that's one of my favorite books. It's one of the only books that I've read cover to cover a number of times. Because, okay, one last point. So there are two types of communication, really. One to convey truth and one to inspire action. So the rhetorical, so Aristotle in the Rhetoric, he kind of lays out how to speak to move people's hearts and emotions. Whereas in the posterior and prior analytics, he lays out the logic in which you can establish new truths and discover new truths. Now, Thomas, obviously what we're going through right now is very precise scientific reasoning out of different truths and establishment and uncovering, etc. So it is very intellectual focused, and it's not focused on motivating you to make a positive change in your life, motivating you to be a better person. It's not about the emotions. It's not about moving the will. It's about informing the mind of truth. And then upon contemplation of that truth, then our will can move. But the writing is not directed at moving the will or the emotions. It's directed at informing the intellect and teaching the mind. So there's great value in a book like the Confessions of St. Augustine, because there's that emotional content. It's so beautiful and compelling. For example, one of the phrases that is probably the most well-known from that book is where he exclaims multiple times throughout the books, "Oh, late have I loved you, oh beauty ever ancient, ever new." And he's exclaiming in the midst of him writing, he's exclaiming how he laments his wayward ways. He laments that it took him so long to find and to fall in love with this beautiful, personal, loving, tender God that he now receives so much joy in and so much fulfillment from. And so it's beautiful because he conveys so beautifully this movement of his heart that your heart cannot help but move in response. It's absolutely beautiful. It's one of the greatest works of all time. You can see I'm getting choked up already, so maybe that one will be a hard one for me to get through. But I think that would be that's one of the top on my list to read with you guys, because it's just so beautiful. And I want to share that with you if you haven't read it yet. So, okay, we're almost 45 minutes now, or almost 40 minutes. So I will wrap it up there, but drop some ideas. I'm inclined to read, and there's another, The Alchemist is a wonderful book. Shiva and I talked about that as well. There's so many other wonderful books. I don't want to get away from this work because there's several volumes, but I want to take a break after this book, after this first volume. So be thinking about it. Be thinking about what book you'd like. I'm inclined to read you the Confessions, but I'm open to suggestions. So think about it. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to share, of course. I appreciate it. Also, don't forget to go to Phone Booth Podcast, .substack.com. And also don't forget tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, the phone booth guys will be going live. I will most likely not be there because I'll be in the throes of moving. But I do encourage you to continue to obviously go and be with the guys there in the chat. It's going to be a good evening as well. There's a lot of interesting things that have happened this week, as you can tell. Wars and rumors of war, Candace Owen drama, and all this other stuff. Anyways, so lots of interesting topics on the table for tomorrow. But anyways, thank you for joining me again for Cup of Jonah. Please say a prayer for me today as I arrange all of my things and prepare to move tomorrow. Thank you so much. God bless you. See you guys on Monday.